Okay.
What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation. I'm your host, Alan Sakian, and we are in a hot tub right now at Dr. Rick Doblin's house, the founder of MAPS.
Yeah, it's great to have this meeting with you, Alan. This is part of my office. I have had meetings here in the past. My office is just indoors, a few feet away. But I just think this is a wonderful opportunity for us to have this chat.
Exactly. In a hot tub, we're more relaxed.
Oh, yeah.
We're in Boston. It's now approaching the end of spring, early summer. It's really nice out.
Yeah.
MAPS is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. You've been at it for 32
Yeah, MAPS
years.
was started in 86. DEA first tried to criminalize MDMA in 84. And so that's where I organized a group of therapists and researchers to sue the DEA to try to keep the therapeutic use of MDMA available. We won the DEA lawsuit, but the head of the DEA rejected the recommendation. Then we sued him in the appeals courts. We won a couple times. Eventually, the DEA lawyers got smart enough to figure out how to satisfy the appeals court and keep MDMA illegal, and that's when I started MAPS in 86, because it was clear the only way was going to be through the FDA and through science. But it's really since 1972 when I decided to focus my life on psychedelics after having a lot of difficult LSD trips, and at 18 years old going to the guidance counselor in my college, New College of Florida, and saying, it was a different era. I said, I need some help with my LSD trips. And the guidance counselor was fine with that. And he said, yeah, I'll help you, and here's this book to read. And it was Realms of the Human Unconscious by Stan Grof.
Yeah, who we've been in touch with to come on the show as well.
Oh, good.
Yes.
Oh, good.
Yes,
he likes hot tubs too.
Good. we'll need to touch on that as well as we go through this. And then your initial research was in the oral use versus the smoking use for cancer purposes, for being able to, was it sleep or relax?
Well, that was for nausea control for cancer chemotherapy.
Yeah.
So that was my first research as a master's student at Harvard at the Kennedy School of Government.
Yep.
But the first research I ever did before was at my college, which was a follow-up, 25-year follow-up to the Good Friday experiment. And so that was one of the key experiments that Timothy Leary was involved with at Harvard.
Can you teach us about that?
Yeah.
Give us a little bit on that.
Yeah, the Good Friday experiment is phenomenal. So it took place in 1962. A fellow named Walter Pankey was a minister and a doctor and going for PhD, and Timothy Leary was his PhD advisor. And what had been happening with Aldous Huxley and other people, they'd been rediscovering psilocybin and other psychedelics and learning about their religious use for thousands of years. And people had a lot of spiritual experiences from LSD too. So they decided to do an experiment to see if psychedelics can produce mystical experiences. And to give you a sense of how non-controversial this was, this took place in Boston University Chapel on Good Friday, and the minister was Howard Thurman, who was one of the most dynamic black preachers in America, and he was the mentor of Martin Luther King.
Wow.
Because Martin Luther King got a PhD at Boston University years before that. And so he permitted this to be done. So the experiment was basically 20 divinity students, all male, from Andover Newton Theological Seminary, and they went into church for about a 3.5, 4-hour service on Good Friday. And beforehand, before the service began, everybody got a pill. And half was going to be a placebo. They didn't know what was going to be in it. It turned out nicotinic acid, which gives you kind of a hot flush, but makes you think something's happening, and psilocybin. Mm-hmm. And so...
What was the dose?
The dose was 30 milligrams. Okay. So it was a hefty dose of psilocybin, synthetic psilocybin.
Synthetic,
yeah. Mm-hmm. And so what had happened beforehand is Walter Pankey had spent like a year or so looking at the mystical literature from all over the world, from different religions. And he decided to try to create a questionnaire about the essence of the mystical experience across different religions. Mm-hmm. So even though this was Christian divinity students in chapel on Good Friday, it didn't have a single question about Jesus. It was more about the abstract elements of a mystical experience, which is the sense of unity, a sense of connection, how everything's connected.
Yes.
That's divided into internal unity and external unity.
Yeah.
External sort of in the world out loud, but internally everything's connected.
We talk about that so much on the show, the importance of finding the inner management within you and the inner divinity within you, and then also the external oneness. We talk about that so much, and that collective consciousness of planet Earth orbiting the star and how to work together, how to prosper together. So it's so important that we've had experiments like this over time to help figure this out, and that we're going in this direction.
And the way the experiment worked, I mean, there's other aspects of it, a transcendence of time and space, a sense of something sacred or holy, a deeply felt positive mood, the fact that it's transitory, paradoxical, ineffable, that you can't really put it into words. It's sort of pre-verbal. It's something that just words are condensing. They're not really capturing the full experience. And so
oh my God, how do you describe a feeling of oneness with words?
It's tough.
Internally and externally.
But this is an experimental tool, this questionnaire, that has been used all the way up till today, from 1962. It's been slightly modified, and it's been used in the psilocybin research, in the LSD research we just finished in Switzerland.
So it's still being used?
This questionnaire is still being used. Yeah, it's fantastic.
And it's a before and after?
Well, no, it's a description. So it's more a description of an experience. So
that you write?
That you fill out the questionnaire. So it's numerical. And that you have to technically have a 60% or more to have a full mystical experience. On all these different dimensions. And so what
Can you give us an idea of the questions?
Did you feel like you were beyond time? Did you feel that everything is connected in the universe? Did you feel that words would not be able to describe this? And there's multiple different questions for each category. And in the end, what was discovered was that 9 out of the 20 people had a mystical experience, and 8 out of those 9 had the psilocybin.
Awesome.
And so it was validating this idea that psychedelics, which have been used for thousands of years, but now in a scientific context, could produce these spiritual, mystical experiences.
62.
62. Now, Walter Pahnke, who did the study, then went on to be one of the premier psychedelic researchers with LSD and psilocybin. He went to work with Stan Grof at Spring Grove Hospital in Maryland, and then he tragically died in a scuba diving accident in 1971. And so when I started college in 71, took a bunch of LSD, dropped out in 72, and I dropped out for 10 years. Always knowing I wanted to study psychedelics, but I didn't know exactly where or how or anything like that. So it took me 10 years to come back to college. So in 82, I started, and I wanted to do the new college where I went. It's the Honors College of the State of Florida. Everybody has to do a thesis. And I wanted to do psychedelic research, but it was during the 80s when all research was shut down in the U.S. and all over the world. And then I started realizing that there's something even more important than doing new research, which is doing follow-up studies to old research. And I figured, here we are in the Nancy Reagan Just Say No escalation of the drug war in the 80s. And because Walter Pahnke had died, he wasn't around, and nobody had thought to do a follow-up study to the Good Friday experiment. And so I thought, I can do that because I'm not asking to give drugs to anybody. So
I'm just going to go and ask the follow-up questions.
I'm just going to go talk to them. And so that led to a whole drama of how I found them and all that. But in the end, I identified 19 out of the 20. I flew all over the country to interview them. And what I found for me was, in some ways, the key to the 1960s. And so the two things that I found, one was negative, one was positive. The negative thing that I found is that they had covered up the fact that one of the persons who had got the psilocybin was so inspired by Reverend Howard Thurman and part of his sermon about telling people that there's a man on the cross and this is your obligation, and he decided to tell somebody that there was a man on the cross, and he thought, I'm going to tell the president. Who else should I tell? And then he realized, I'm in Boston, I'll tell the president of the university. And he left the chapel and he went running down Commonwealth Avenue. And so Timothy Leary and Houston Smith had to go chase him down, and he didn't want to go back indoors. Here he was indoors in this chapel, now he's outside and he's got this mission. So they actually gave him a shot of Thorazine and never reported it. And so what I discovered during this follow-up study is that they underemphasized the risks, in a sense, or the challenges.
Yeah.
They kind of talked more about the mystical experience and not a lot about the struggles that people went through.
Yes.
And they completely covered up this person that we would not have tranquilized that person. That was just back in the 60s. That's what they did. We think that's harmful rather than helpful. Okay, but the other thing that I discovered in a positive way was that the people who had the mystical experience reported in their lives, because of this deep sense of unity, they also, this transcendence of time and space, in the sense they lost a lot of their fear of death, and they decided to get politically engaged.
Yeah.
Now, they were already ministers, they were already socially justice minded, but they got involved in the anti-Vietnam War protests, they got involved in the civil rights movement, they got involved in the women's rights movement, they got involved anti-MX missile basing, they got involved in the environmental movement. And so they made a link between their sense of unity from the mystical experience and motivation for social justice. So I think when people talk about the 60s, most people say, oh, there was this reaction to all these psychedelics, and it was all banned because of all the problems with psychedelics. But I think the real key to the 60s is that it was psychedelics going right that motivated people to get involved in challenging the status quo, and that's what led to the backlash.
And the counterculture?
And to the counterculture, yeah. It motivated the counterculture, it scared the mainstream culture, but that there is this link between this mystical experience, whether it's from psychedelics or any other cause, religion or meditation or fasting or flotation tanks. Flotation. Or whatever, whatever it is. And I think that's what we saw in the 60s, is people got inspired and they challenged the status quo, and Nixon freaked out, and that's why Timothy Leary was the most dangerous man in America.
Yeah.
So for me, the first study ever was this, that I ever did, was this follow-up to the Good Friday experiment, and that kind of validated my theory of social change.
And you listed all of these different things that also lead people to these feelings of wanting social change, because it's not just about a psychedelic use, it's also about a flotation therapy or a meditation or any of these other sort of ways of feeling oneness. It can even be these longer episodes of looking into someone else's eyes for long periods of time, just as simple as that. That can catalyze these feelings.
Or even with Stan Grof developing holotropic breathwork.
Holotropic breathwork.
Hyperventilation, and this whole world comes out.
What? Give us a quick bit on the holotropic breathwork.
All right. Well, Stan, was the world's leading LSD researcher, and when the backlash came, he was in the last group in the U.S. at the Maryland Psychiatric Research Center that was still doing LSD research. But I think it was '73. That he moved out to Esalen and became the scholar in residence at Esalen.
On the coast of California.
Yeah, in Big Sur.
Big Sur,
Yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful spot, and it's sort of the home of the human potential movement and all, and it's still today a remarkable, remarkable spot. But what a lot of those people that were the psychedelic researchers went into looking at non-drug catalysts, because everything else was criminalized. A small group went underground to continue psychedelic therapy. But most people sort of tried to figure out what are some other ways to catalyze these experiences, to demonstrate.
Holotropic breathwork was one of those.
Yes, so the holotropic breathwork, Stan realized that there's a lot of these meditation techniques that have breathing aspects to them, and that traditionally when people are agitated and their emotions, they have like a panic attack, they start hyperventilating.
It's true.
And when they go to the emergency rooms, what they do is they try to stop the hyperventilation and suppress the symptoms. And so Stan and Christina, his wife, thought, well, what if we let the symptoms expand? What if we encourage people to just let it all out, to scream it? Maybe that's a better way than suppressing this. And so they worked for years and then developed this approach, which they called holotropic breathwork, that involves about 3 or 4 hours of lying down, listening to very powerful evocative music, and hyperventilating. The last hour or two is more for quiet, for integration. Then people
very provoking music, and then they would practice the short breath cycles.
Yeah,
and that would maybe catalyze them to unleash what they had as feelings within them, and then calm down at the end in this hour or two.
Yeah.
And then at the end, they may feel like, oh, I have finally let go of everything that I was building up.
Yeah, not everything, but
on the way.
Yeah, and it's not so much short breaths. What Stan, I mean, I think the brilliant thing that he did too, that he and Christina did, was to not make it too much like certain kind of meditation techniques, like 7 times in this nostril, 7 times in that, all these complicated things. What he would just say is breathe faster and deeper.
Faster and deeper.
And find your own, and just keep going. And you'll find within a few minutes, things will start to shift.
Yeah.
You start losing control of your emotions, and then the environment is there to help you lose control, to help things come to the surface.
It's facilitated by professionals, which is another key point of your trials and your work that you're doing right now, is this facilitation of the process.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that's important to stress here when we're talking about breath is that, we talked about meditation or fasting or all these different ways, that these are experiences that are human experiences, catalyzed by all these different things. They're not like drug experiences that are fundamentally hallucinations or distortions. They're the property of the human mind and emotions.
Yeah.
And that there's all these different ways to get into those spaces.
I love that.
And that kind of grounds it. It's kind of, these are natural experiences, and you can do it with breath.
All these different ways to get there, and then get a sense of oneness within, a sense of oneness of the collective. Now, a quick, right before we get to what's going on with MAPS, give us the quick bit on what happened, because the Stanford prison experiment, that was after.
Okay, so there's the Concord prison experiment. The Stanford prison experiment is a different one, where people dressed up as either prisoners or guards. Yeah, and it showed how people can be coerced into being cruel just by social roles, even though they know they're making it up. But the Concord prison experiment, and Concord is just 10 miles that way.
Okay, yep.
And so what Tim realized is that, and this was his other major experiment when he was at Harvard.
Follow-up.
It was after the it started before a little bit and lasted till after the Good Friday experiment. Mm-hmm. And it was often mostly with Ralph Metzner and a few others. But what Tim realized is that if people say they have a mystical experience, or they say, I'm happier now, or whatever, you just have their word for it. So it's subjective in a way.
Yeah.
But he said, what can we look at that's objective? And he figured if we can work with prisoners right before they get paroled, the objective measure is, are they going back to prison or not? So the idea of the Concord prison experiment was to help people before they get released to have this kind of pro-social, mystical experience.
Yes.
And then hopefully once they get out, they won't commit crimes to the same rate.
And recidivism is lowered because of this.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And recidivism is just, you just check it out. Everybody can agree. Yeah. Look,
they didn't come back. It's objective. Yeah.
And so Tim reported this as tremendous success, and it was.
Do you know what it was? The percentages?
Well, I'll say in just a second that everybody thought. I thought that this was one of the most important studies ever in the history of psychedelics.
Yeah.
And it was tremendous success, and he showed that you could reduce recidivism.
Recidivism sucks because it takes away from that person's soul. It takes away from the finances of our platform. We're trying to educate people rather than imprison them further. There's so many things that this is really good for, and them leaving. There's so many movements for them to be people to become entrepreneurs after prison. There's so many of these movements, and so this is really crucial. Is it being repeated?
Well, let me say, so I wanted to do this follow-up study to the Concord prison experiment because I thought this would bring to light one of the most important successes in psychedelic history from the 60s. But the problem was that I didn't know who the prisoners were.
Yeah.
There was Tim didn't have any lists. There was no way to find out who the prisoners were.
Yeah.
So there happened to be a report. I published a paper in 1991 about the Good Friday experiment follow-up. And there was an article in the Boston Globe about it. And then I got a call from a fellow, Mike Forcier, who said, I work for the prison system.
Ooh.
And we have a special room for the files of famous prisoners. And in that, we have the files of all the people from the Concord prison experiment.
And then did you do a follow-up?
Well, so it took us a year to get permission. We had to go all the way up to the governor, William Weld at the time. Yeah. And the piece of paper that we got that said we could do this study was incredible because somebody had it was all permission, but in handwriting, somebody had said, no psilocybin administration. Just to clarify. Now, of course, we were just going to look at their records. This is not, but they just wanted to emphasize
that. Yeah.
Absolutely not.
Yep.
So eventually, we did get to do all this. We got to look at it, but then I started getting this sickening feeling in my stomach as I was working on this, because the numbers were not shaping up to what Tim had reported. So what I was finding in this follow-up study was that Tim had really twisted the data, and he had reported on it multiple times over the years, and the farther away it was from the original experiment, the better and better the results he claimed that they were. And what I was able to find, and then he started saying, well, at one point early on he said, well, they didn't have reduced recidivism, but they went back to prison for more minor things like parole violations rather than new crimes.
Okay.
So I'm sorting through this, and
it's
I'm getting
tough to hammer out all the nuance of it.
Yeah. Well, then it turns out that he completely fudged it, completely. And that people had gone back to prison for parole violations, but that's because they had committed new crimes. Yeah. And they were violated on other things, and then they were convicted of those crimes. So I could watch. And
also, this single episode is very difficult to get people to this pro-social.
Well, they would have several administrations too. They'd have two. But what I also discovered was that near the so Timothy Leary and Ramdas, they got kicked out in 19.
It has to be a change in habit, right? It has to be a change in repatterning our behavior.
Yes. So they got kicked out in 1963. But they started realizing that, just like with drug abuse treatment, you need support afterwards. Like with Ibogaine, all the people that get Ibogaine, but then if they go back to the same environment.
Correct, yeah.
So they started a support group for the prisoners after they got out.
Yes.
And then that fell apart after they got kicked out of Harvard. So I think my conclusion of this is, first off, that Tim left science behind and became popularizer.
Yeah.
But I think he saw so much wrong information exaggerating the risks that he felt justified to exaggerate the benefits.
And you bring up that key point of community through this process, and that same thing applies to us working with homeless populations. These communities, after you go onto parole, what are the communities of people that help you stay out over time?
Yeah, so my conclusion would be that we need to go back and replicate that experiment and do work with people before they get paroled, and that can be extremely helpful to work on their trauma, work on all of their emotional problems. And then, though, once they get out, we need more support groups.
Yep.
And then I think we probably will be able to reduce recidivism.
Yep.
But it was very difficult for me to be the one who's an advocate for psychedelics, to have to expose what the world thought of as one of the best experiments ever.
Correct.
And to show that it was not done, the results were not interpreted.
We have a lot more work to do to make sure that they are interpreted, that we do the right job along the way. Okay, now let's break down MAPS. Can you give us the breakdown in terms of the number one, because right now, so psychedelics and cannabis, both. Yeah. So then we're looking at, is it MDMA first, and then psilocybin, and then LSD, and then cannabis, or what's this breakdown?
Well, for MAPS, and there's other groups. So there's other groups, one called USONA and one called Compass Pathways, that are trying to develop psilocybin into a medicine for depression. Compass is a for-profit company based in England, and USONA is a non-profit based in Madison, Wisconsin. So they're doing psilocybin.
And you're not.
We're not.
You're not.
No. It's just there's so. I mean, to make a drug through a medicine.
Oh gosh.
Is so complicated, and so we've sort of focused on MDMA as our top priority, with marijuana as our second.
And no LSD.
Well, we did fund the first LSD study in 40 years. But we have had to, for strategic reasons, because we don't have unlimited resources. Although if some nonprofit, if somebody wanted to donate more, we would
be able
restart
to do so.
The LSD. I mean, we just had April 19th was the 75th anniversary of the discovery of LSD, and there is studies in Switzerland being done, looked at LSD for anxiety.
Yeah.
But we have realized that we have to concentrate, and so it's MDMA assisted psychotherapy for PTSD. And today is a tremendous day.
Yes.
Very fortuitous that you guys have come by today. So we got a paper published in Lancet Psychiatry that is about one of our phase 2 studies that was in veterans, firefighters, and police officers with chronic treatment-resistant PTSD. And we got absolutely great results. We just watched the coverage on Fox News. It's in the New York Times. It's the American Psychiatric Association daily newsletter. The top key thing for today is our MDMA study. It's been on CNN. It's been on all the military.com websites and military sites. So
even Fox was playfully talking about the importance of this.
It was shocking to me. It was shocking to me, but it's because of the veterans.
Yes.
I think that they care more about veterans and PTSD, and everybody from Fox on.
Police officers, people that help us.
Yeah. Well, so this is what I learned at the Kennedy School of Government. So, where I got my master's and PhD in the regulation of the medical use of Schedule 1. So I also learned a lot about politics. And so in sort of this psychedelic science, we have to pick which drugs, which patient populations, which conditions. And so we need to break down the us and them. Because this was culture, counterculture, we need to, in a sense, show that it's helpful to them, to the mainstream culture. So we knew there's massive crisis with veterans and PTSD.
Yes.
But I thought, just for political reasons, we'll say that the study is for veterans, firefighters, and police officers. I didn't think we'd get any veterans. I didn't think we'd get any firefighters or police officers. But in the end, we did. We got one police officer and 3 firefighters and 22 veterans.
Yes.
So, and we got tremendous results.
Can you tell us?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So the important,
this is phase 2.
This is phase 2.
What does that mean?
Well, so let's start. So you begin with, usually, what are called non-clinical studies, which are animal studies, trying to figure out the toxicity of the drug and what it might do physiologically, how it might be helpful. Then you go into humans, and that's called phase 1. And phase 1 are usually healthy volunteers, dose-response safety studies, where again, you're trying to see what are the side effects, maybe you get some clue as to the effects. If it's a very dangerous drug, like cancer chemotherapy drugs, it's called combination phase 1, phase 2, where you bring in actual patients, because the risks to non-patients would be too great. But then you move to phase 3, and those are the large-scale multi-site studies that are meant to be the definitive studies to prove safety and efficacy to get permission to market a drug as a prescription medicine. There's also what's called phase 4 studies. And so the FDA can require additional research after the drug is approved. So for example, the FDA is requiring us to do work in adolescents with PTSD, because many drugs are studied in adults, but they're never studied in kids, and they're prescribed off-label for kids. But therapists and physicians, they don't know the dose, they don't know if it'll really work. There's all sorts of things. So the FDA is now more and more requiring pharmaceutical companies, in which case MAPS as a nonprofit, we're being treated the same way. So we're being required to do a study in 12 to 17-year-olds with PTSD who have failed on other treatments, but that's a phase 4 study after the drug is approved.
Okay.
All right, so what we did, MAPS got started in 86. It took us till 92. It took us 6 years to get permission for the first phase 1 safety study.
Wow.
Yeah, and that took years to do, and then it wasn't until 1999 and 2000, that we got permission for the first phase 2 study, which was MDMA for post-traumatic stress disorder. And that was done in Spain. And unfortunately, we had very good results, and there was good media in the early stages of the study, but that alerted the Madrid Anti-Drug Authority, and they shut the study down for political reasons. It was super frustrating. But then we were able in 2004 to start the first study in the U.S. And that study was mostly women survivors of childhood sexual abuse and adult rape and assault. So it was almost entirely women in this first study. And the results were outstanding. So roughly 83% of them no longer had PTSD.
And this was, how many was the sample size?
This was 21.
21. And this is administered over how long?
This is about a 3.5-month process.
3.5 months.
So with the 3 MDMA sessions, 1 month apart, and 12 90-minute non-drug psychotherapy sessions. You get 3 before the first MDMA session, and then 3 for preparation, and then 3 after each MDMA session for integration.
Wow.
And then 2 months after the last MDMA session is what's called the primary outcome measure, That's what the FDA is going to consider. And then there's a 12-month follow-up. And sometimes we do even longer. But
so
that's not for approval. That's more for...
18 of them or so said that they did not feel like they...
Well, they didn't so much say it, is that there's a hour-long interview developed by the Veterans Administration called the Clinician Administered PTSD Scale, or the CAPS. And that's how you assess...
Even today, we're still
Even
doing
today,
this.
yeah. It's the gold standard all over the world. It was used to approve Zoloft and Paxil for PTSD. It's the measure that the FDA uses.
Okay.
And so they reported on the CAPS to these independent raters who didn't know, were they in the MDMA group, were they in the placebo group? So one group would go through this with therapy and get a pill that would be an inactive placebo, and the other would go through it and get MDMA. So everybody got the therapy, but what varied was what's in the drug.
Yeah. Okay.
And so then we realized that it was important for us to start working with veterans, because...
That means only 11 got the...
Well, it's a little bit more complicated.
Yeah.
You're right about that. So, well, you don't always have to do 50-50.
Okay.
So we did 13 and 8.
13 and 8.
13
okay.
got MDMA, 8
Cool.
in the placebo. But
Okay.
what we do is everybody in the placebo group, once we have this blinded pilot, this 2-month primary outcome measure, then everybody that's in the placebo group can go through it again. Open label means they all are going to get MDMA. So the 83% is either the people that went through it. So what we were able to show is that by looking at how the people did with therapy and then how well they did when we added MDMA, that roughly 40% of the benefit is from the therapy and 60% is from the drug.
Okay.
Which is really good, because that means is that most of it is from the drug.
Yeah.
And so we can have a wide range of skills in the therapists, and people are still likely to get better, and also people can heal themselves. We hear all these stories about people that took MDMA at a rave and they remembered trauma and they were able to work through it, or we have terrible stories of people that took MDMA at a rave, remembered trauma, and they're with friends who just want to party and then they try to stuff their feelings down and they are worse off for months afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's not the drug, it's the drug-assisted psychotherapy and being willing to process it.
Yeah.
And so
the willingness to process it.
And so what we've done so far is 107 patients in all 6 different studies.
Since 92.
Since, well, the 92 one doesn't count because that's not PTSD patients.
Got it.
But yeah, so there's an additional 28 patients from that study.
Okay.
And that's part of our safety database. But 107 of PTSD patients have got MDMA.
Okay.
And November 29th, 2016, we had a meeting with the FDA, which is called an end of phase 2 meeting. That's where you present your data, safety and efficacy, and say we want to go to the big time. We want to go to phase 3 and make it into a medicine.
Yes.
And the FDA said yes, we could. And then they have a new program, relatively new, that's called Special Protocol Assessment. And you can voluntarily engage in this special protocol assessment. And what happens is that you negotiate every aspect of your design with the FDA. And a lot of pharmaceutical companies don't like to do it because it delays things 6 to 12 months. And they've got a patent and they're trying to get it approved, and they're not doing anything very controversial or very complex from a scientific methodological point of view. But we are doing both controversial and complex, because how do you do a double-blind study where you know if you've taken the drug or not? So we went through this special protocol assessment, and 28th of July of 2017, we reached agreement.
Great.
All right, and then the big thing is that we also, so that was the most important program of the FDA, because now they are legally bound to approve the drug if that design gets statistically significant evidence of efficacy and no new safety problems come up. And it's unlike a new drug where, drugs that pharmaceutical companies are tested in a few thousand people, then you let it loose and you see the 1 in 100,000 side effect. But, tens and tens and tens of millions of people have taken MDMA, ecstasy for decades and decades, so we know the safety profile. So that's not going to be
manufactured last year.
Yeah, or who knows what's in it.
Who knows what's in it? Yeah.
So then what we said is the most visible program the FDA has is called Breakthrough Therapy. And so 2/3 of the applications from Big Pharma for Breakthrough Therapy for their drugs are rejected. So it's really just for drugs for serious or life-threatening illnesses for which there's a large population of people that don't get relief from the currently available drugs, and your preliminary phase 2 evidence or preliminary evidence phase 1 suggests that this could be a breakthrough.
For them, cool.
So I was a little bit concerned under President Trump and under Attorney General Sessions, would FDA be willing to be so public about their support and their promise of MDMA research?
Yeah.
And so August 15th, they said, yes, we have Breakthrough Therapy Designation. So that's going to help us get it approved. We have more meetings with the FDA. They're now partnering with us and trying to make it through the system.
Amazing.
All right, so what we're doing right now, and then I should say over the last few months, starting in December to March, an astonishing thing happened is we raised over $10 million.
Yeah.
And it was because of Mr. Pine. We think it's Mr., but it's Pine from the Pineapple Fund. And
is that a crypto fund?
Yes. So what happened is this guy, Pine, all we know is Pine, had borderline personality disorder and was depressed. And so he was looking for treatment. And he decided that he would try ketamine treatment.
Yes.
At this point, he had not heard about MAPS. He had no idea about MAPS.
Yeah.
So under the influence of ketamine, he has this vision. And the vision is that the way for him to start feeling better and to get out of these loops of depression and borderline personality is to help other people.
Yeah.
That helping other people is sort of the key. And he decided that he had made so much money in Bitcoin that he would give away $86 million worth of Bitcoins.
Wow.
And he put a little notice in Reddit, just a paragraph or two. Multiple people saw it immediately and sent to MAPS, apply for this.
Yeah.
And we had, then one of our staff submitted a one-page application.
Wow.
This is even before I even heard of it. So,
wow.
People are emailing the staff, they submit a one-page application.
You have a great team.
We do. We have a fantastic team. So then the next day, we got an email from Pine saying, I'm giving you $1 million. Wow. And then 2 hours later, they showed up. The Bitcoin showed up in our wallet.
Whoa.
And then he said, I might be willing to give you a matching grant. So we talked about that for a while, and then he gave us a $4 million matching grant that was expiring March 10th, from January 10th to March 10th. And so we were able to use that to get $4 million from other people. $1 million of which was also in Bitcoins. Yeah. We also got $1 million from Bitcoins from somebody we don't even know who it is.
Yeah.
And then we got $750,000 from another cryptocurrency coin called the Loon, which is used for like what they want to do is kind of a Wikipedia where you pay the authors in these loons and ads, but a Wikipedia with ads. Anyway, we got all these donations. So we have now, shockingly, been able to raise $26 million.
Hell yes.
Yeah, $5 million from Dr. Bronner's, Shauna Haley, who was a tech wizard who was on our board of directors, who died 2012 and left us $5.5 million in his will that we saved.
Wow.
$2.5 million from Good Ventures, which was an early Facebook person is giving us that money. But in any case, we have this war chest of $26 million, and it was in October, right before this started happening, that I realized that the National Institute of Mental Health and the Department of Defense and the VA were not going to give us a penny, even though FDA had said it's a breakthrough, even though they have a massive problem with PTSD.
Yeah, that's so strange.
Well, it's the stigma of these drugs.
Yeah, yeah.
It seems like the VA is... Oh.
It's not a stigma of the drugs. There's a reason also on top of that, the criminal justice system.
For sure.
I don't want to... Go ahead, continue.
The involvement of money and corruption.
It's about the persecution of minorities. I mean, if we look at... look at Florida, where Bush got elected, and which went for Trump, and they have arrested loads and loads of African Americans who tend to vote Democratic, and once you get a felony arrest, then you can't vote in Florida.
Aye.
So it's called felony disenfranchisement.
Yeah.
So the war on drugs is a tool of politics to make it so that the Republicans win. Democrats, a lot of them didn't realize that until too late.
Yeah.
But in any case, there's this whole problem where we realized we're not going to get any support from the official world.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking, okay, well, in a way, I'm glad. It's been 30 plus years. We've gotten this far without it.
Yeah.
So now we'll be able to say that it's a gift to the world. MDMA is a gift to the world from the psychedelic community.
Exactly.
But now I have to say that it's a gift to the world from the psychedelic and cryptocurrency community. And so what we're doing right now is working with the final step of training the therapists. And so we've got a protocol that the therapists that we've trained, 84 therapists, 42 male-female co-therapy teams, and they're each getting a patient with PTSD to work with in open label, which means, again, everybody knows they're getting MDMA. It won't count for efficacy because it's not part of a controlled study. And so we're in the final stages of training the therapists at 16 sites, 2 in Israel, 2 in Canada, and the rest in the U.S., throughout the U.S.
Good.
And so this summer we're starting phase 3. And we think by 2021 we'll have MDMA approved as a prescription medicine.
Amazing.
All right, so the other thing before we run out of light out here, I'll just say that we're also doing the only study in America with marijuana for PTSD.
Yeah.
It's the only marijuana drug development study for any reason underway in the United States. There are studies by GW Pharmaceuticals with CBD extract. That's for childhood epilepsy, and they're going to get approved. They just had their FDA advisory committee, but we're the only ones working with the plant. And it's with 76 veterans with chronic treatment-resistant PTSD. It's taking place with Dr. Sue Sisley in Phoenix, Arizona.
Great.
And we got $2.1 million from the state of Colorado.
Amazing.
So they've made roughly $500 million in marijuana taxes. They put out $10 million for research.
Perfect.
And we got $2.1 million from the state of Colorado. So that's our first government grant ever, but it's a state government. So we've now enrolled 56 of 76 veterans. The Phoenix VA is refusing to refer subjects. Again, stigma and prejudice, but we're going to get enough subjects anyway. And then the big issue, and this is what we're also working on with marijuana, is how do you make marijuana into a medicine? Because right now, for the last 50 years, since 1968, there's only one source of marijuana that's grown under DEA license, that's federally legal, that can be used in FDA-approved studies. And that's grown at the University of Mississippi under contract to the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And they can provide for research, but they cannot provide a commercial medicine. And so phase 3, which I've described as the major studies, they have to be done with the exact same drug that you want to market. So because NIDA marijuana cannot be marketed, we cannot move to phase 3. So since 1999 and 2000, we've been trying to break this monopoly. And as of August 12th, 2016...
that regulation is holding us back.
Massively. And there was just an incredible article in Business Week, Bloomberg Business Week, that said America is giving away the $30 billion medical marijuana industry. Because there's Canadian companies, British companies, Israeli companies, Dutch companies, but not any federally legal U.S. companies.
Exactly, giving it away.
It's stupid.
Stupid.
And it's a jobs program. So we're trying to tell Trump, this is about jobs.
And health, wellness,
And this will reduce healthcare costs because marijuana is cheap compared to all these pharmaceutical drugs that it will replace. So,
which is another one of the things potentially holding it back.
So what we're...
Are we... Okay, let's
let's
go in.
That's
a good place. What's up? We're back inside now after the great hot tub session, dried off, and we're ready to continue the conversation.
So where I was at was saying that this government monopoly on marijuana is something that's essential that we break. And it's been kept protected by the DEA because they have not wanted good research about benefits of marijuana to take place. But we've worked on this a long time. In 2005, we had a lawsuit against the DEA, and we won the lawsuit. In 2007, the DEA administrative law judge said it would be in the public interest for us to get a license to grow marijuana. We were working actually with Professor Lyle Craker at UMass Amherst. But the DEA, just like with the MDMA situation, the head of the DEA rejected the recommendation. But they waited almost 2 years before they did anything, and they 5 days before Obama took office, they rejected the recommendation, just to screw it up so that he wouldn't face this fresh. And so it took a while into his second term, but August 12, 2016, DEA finally said that they would end the monopoly. And since then, 26 or so people have applied for licenses. But then we got Trump, and then we got Sessions, and Sessions has been blocking the DEA. But recently, he's under a lot of pressure from different senators as we get more medical marijuana.
Like Washington State.
Oh my God! So Camilla Harris, Orrin Hatch is actually one of the main Republican senators, is one of the main advocates for ending the monopoly. Camilla Harris, the senator from California, Senator Schatz from Hawaii, Senator Gillibrand from New York, Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts here. So there's more and more pressure. And they realize that this business is growing, that we are giving it away to the world.
Correct.
And so
we have a lot of smart people here that should be researching this and getting better at helping people with this.
Yeah, and all of the state marijuana, they're producing way better quality than the government can provide, but none of it is federally legal, so we can't use any of it in FDA research. So that's our big thing, is to try to break the monopoly, and then if we get good results from this marijuana PTSD study in veterans, then we'll expand it. And one of the interesting things for those of your viewers from Michigan is that there's going to be a marijuana legalization initiative on the ballot in November in Michigan. And the way it was written by some friends of ours. They put in their $20 million a year for 2 years for research into cannabis for veterans and to help reduce suicides.
Perfect.
So if the Michigan legalization initiative passes, eventually there'll be loads of money for making the plant. And so our goal is to take the plant in bud flower form and make it into a medicine, either smoked or vaporized. There's, I think that's the wind. Okay, there's loads and loads of companies for profit that are going to take the marijuana plant, slice and dice it, extracts and non-smoking delivery systems that they patent, and all that's good, and all that should move forward because that provides important tools. But what we want to do is have generic buds available at very low cost, and then there'll be a little bit of a check on the prices that other people could charge for all their other stuff. But I'm fine with for-profit drug development, and we will cooperate with them, share what we know, but we want to take the bud. And in Israel right now, they grow very good high-potency buds, trimmed buds, for 60 cents a gram, which is about $14 an ounce. Super duper high potency buds. So it's going to be a very inexpensive medicine.
Yeah.
And I think that's what, as a non-profit, we're caring more about public health and making loads of money.
Yes.
And that's the, and it'll go generic. But that's what we want to do with marijuana.
So now I'm hearing that we're approaching this era of this collaboration or this competition a little bit. And we're doing this with cannabis. This is happening with psychedelics now. With psilocybin, we were mentioning these two organizations, USANA and Compass. Okay, and so then there's what we just described with Mississippi having this monopoly, and versus being able to take cannabis for the better for research and give it for people's health and test it, research, doing all this across the U.S. and the world. So this conversation happens a lot on Simulation. We talk a lot about globalization. We talk a lot about collaboration and how to not exacerbate wealth inequality, how to not exacerbate hiccups that we might have with the proliferation of artificial intelligence, the proliferation of biowarfare, overregulation, and things like that, or profiteering rather than focusing on people's health. And so this leads us into this discussion point, which is how are we going to, as companies want to figure out how to innovate and fund lots of dollars in innovation, and then they want to, patent their innovations and their processes. But at the same time, you don't want to inhibit other people from just picking psilocybin from the forest and using it. You don't want to imprison them. So how do we figure this out?
Well, I think you've put your finger on one of the more complicated issues that sort of split the psychedelic research community. So you're basically talking about legalization. How do we make it so people can have access to these drugs for their own benefit, religious or recreational even, or therapeutic, without having to go through a pharmaceutical company and a doctor, or without having to go through a religion. And so I think that is the long-term goal, is to make it so that we look at prohibition and see it as a system of repression against minorities, in particular political minorities, or African Americans or Mexicans or Chinese, or the whole history of prohibition in the U.S., that we move to a public health approach. But I think before that, this question of how medicalization leads to legalization. That's what we've seen with medical marijuana. That's what's changed people's attitudes towards legalization of marijuana. So I think we have to medicalize psychedelics, and then we'll get to this point. But then how do we medicalize? And that's where there is also this competition or cooperation. So I think that for-profit drug development is fine. I think that you do have wrong incentives a lot of times. And so what MAPS has done, a lot of times people say, I don't think marijuana should be illegal. I don't want people going to jail for it, but I don't want big alcohol and big tobacco and big pharma to start selling marijuana, and they'll sell it to kids, and they'll sell it to the heavy users, and they don't care if it's addictive or they won't.
And they'll add chemicals to it as well. It won't remain organic. The cigarettes that I smoke, it's not tobacco. It's the drugs that keep me back. Coming back for $10 a day. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's totally
good. That's a
good that's totally right. And so what we've done is we're trying to not just pioneer new treatments with psychedelics and marijuana, but a new way to sell pharmaceuticals. So we've created what we think is maybe it's the only public benefit corporation in the pharmaceutical space. There are other nonprofit pharmaceutical companies, though. So, but they tend to develop drugs and then they sell it off to some other for-profit company to market. So what we have is the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation that is maximizing public benefit, not profits, to sell MDMA. It's a for-profit company because we need to pay taxes on the income from MDMA. But it has only one investor in the MAPS Public Benefit Corporation, which is the nonprofit. So the nonprofit controls the for-profit. That's what will sell MDMA. That's what's doing our research.
It'll fund the research.
And then whatever profits we make from MDMA will fund more research. It doesn't have to stick with MDMA. Then we could fund LSD research or marijuana research. So that's how we're structured.
That seems to be a seed that's structured in a very ethical way. And that's what we love, and that's what we want to hear more of. And we don't know, some seeds are not structured that ethical way. It sounds like that's starting to happen a little bit.
Well, I think that for-profit can be ethical as well. And there's just a general suspicion of pharmaceutical companies that's totally justified, based on the way they've performed. But they don't have to perform that way. So I think there's another issue, which is people are suffering. There are millions and millions of people with depression. So the fact that Compass has decided to try to work with investors to make psilocybin into a medicine for depression, and USONA is working with donors to make it into a medicine, we're helping both of them. So we're cooperating with both, and I think both are legitimate. And I think there's a little bit of a difference in how they're approaching it. From a business point of view, what Compass is trying to do is to use the minimum, to get it at the minimum amount of cost to help the most people. And so in a way that means reducing therapists, reducing therapist hours, trying to have the drug do as much of it as possible. And there's dangers there. You can just say, hey, here's like what's being done now with ketamine for depression. It works for a lot of people, but it would, I think, and many people think it might be more effective if it were combined with psychotherapy.
Definitely. But
people are just saying, oh, here's ketamine, and and then you're off on your own. There's not help to integrate it, and there's not that much help to prepare for it. But we see Pine, who had his experience under ketamine that inspired him to support MAPS, and he said one of the things he realized is that when he was under the influence of ketamine, he wished that he would have had support from a therapist. And the fact that we're talking about MDMA-assisted psychotherapy made him feel more comfortable. But the point is, we are willing to cooperate with anybody that is trying to make these drugs into medicines, whether they're for-profit or nonprofit. And I think that both can be done ethically. You can have an unethical nonprofit where you pay yourself millions of dollars worth of salaries, and you hire your family, and so it's more about the board of directors and what's the purpose of it and why. And we've got this whole way so far with only donors, no investors. So we're in a really good shape.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's very similar to what we're doing with our studio space and our creative incubating effort is that we're sustaining off of Patreon, off of the service for creators and artists to get paid every month by people that believe in them.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, and that way, same thing where we can totally take the creative effort of this community and see where it goes together with that. we're talking about the seed and the importance of the ethics behind the seed. Yeah. And then you said there are many people that are working a for-profit to decrease the cost as much as possible so that they can give it to people. Should there also be psychotherapy combined with that? What's the efficacy of that? See, this is going to be these next coming conversations. It's going to be really exciting, really interesting. And phase 3 is moving forward with MDMA and PTSD. It's now you were on talking about it on Fox News. It's amazing. So we're really grateful to have this opportunity to sit down together. Rick, I want to ask you a couple quick questions that we typically ask on simulation on the show. Okay. I want to ask you first, what's the deepest emotion you've ever felt?
Love, I guess. Well,
tell us about that feeling of love. Tell us about it.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm, so I'll describe. This was what prepared me, I would say, to get married. And so this was an experience in 1985. It was a couple of years before I met my wife, but it was an MDMA experience. And I was camping out by myself doing MDMA all night, and I was trying, in a way, to think about the DEA. How do I, as I'm getting more public, how do I stay safe? That was a part of it.
Yeah.
This was at Esalen at Big Sur, so I was camping out. So the mountains go right down to the water. Yes. I was camping down right there. There was a place where I found where the high tide came within a few feet. There was this little space that the high tide wouldn't get to because of boulders out in the ocean. So it was this protected spot with the roaring of the ocean, and there was a little freshwater creek running by. And so I was kind of alone in the universe, this enormous universe with the roaring of the massive Pacific Ocean. But I was also thinking about Brother David Steindl-Rast, who was a very inspirational person for me. And he was a Roman Catholic monk, mystic, ecumenical, but he was willing to do MDMA and had done MDMA in the monastery to help him meditate and found that it was useful. And he was even willing to be public about it. He was in the first art. So I was trying to think, why would somebody want a celibate life? I was at this point without a girlfriend, between relationships, and I was just sort of thinking, how do I stay safe from the DEA, and how do I think about what's the value of a monastic life? So anyway, it was
focus a lot on your mission and your values and making the world better.
Yeah.
And that's very interesting that you even bring that up, because I think many people get pushed by their genetics into procreation. And so they put sometimes their impact on the world second to having a family, or they try and combine them somehow, which is also very good. But to just do this whole celibate life for the greater good of humanity is mind-blowing.
Well, and I was just trying to sort it out, like what was in it for him. And so it was in the middle of the night, and I had this this one moment where I felt, the universe is just so enormously vast, and the stars are just so enormous, the pounding of the ocean and stuff, and just, and I felt like I'm so tiny in this vast universe that I might just disappear. And there was a little bit of fear, like I would just disappear into the universe. And at some point I realized that I hadn't disappeared. And then I started thinking, well, why am I not flying off into the universe? And I started thinking about gravity. That gravity was kind of holding my molecules together. It was holding me there. And then I had this image of gravity like love that pulled things together, and then I felt like I was being cradled in the arms of gravity. Like gravity was a lover, and I was in the arms of a lover being cradled, and it felt this enormous sense of connection to the universe, to the loving nature of the universe.
Yeah.
And that image of just being cradled in the arms of gravity.
Yes.
And I felt like then that I was always in touch with this possibility of love, whether I had a lover or not.
Yeah.
That it was love from the universe, and that is what the monastic life is supposed to help you get to.
Wow.
That you don't connect to particular lovers or families, but you sort of have this universal love.
Yes.
And so then I thought, okay, now that I've got the universal love, I want to love her too.
Yeah, exactly.
So I decided not to go for the celibate life.
You'd want to share that with that understanding. You want to share that. You want to give back, and you can't give it back to the universe. But I hear you.
Yeah, that's a good one. Cradled by the universe.
Cradled by the arms of gravity.
Arms of gravity, because you're so aware of existence, and then that helps you really feel the love within you of the cosmos, and then also enables you to give love out from you. Okay, and then how about, since we are speaking about the cosmos, do you think we're alone in the cosmos?
Well, I mean, it's hard to believe that we're alone. I mean, it's so vast. How could it be that we're alone? Do I believe that there's been visitors from outer space that are here? Not necessarily.
Do you think advanced civilizations are roaming the cosmos?
Possibly. I don't know. I mean, look at it this way. We're about to destroy the planet. We could easily, through environmentalism, through disregard of the environment, we've got all these incredible technologies. Einstein said that our technology has exceeded our humanity.
Yeah.
So maybe there are no more advanced civilizations. Maybe they've all self-destructed.
Correct.
And, whether we're going to self-destruct or not is not clear.
Yeah.
Whether we're going to survive or not. So
it's a Fermi filter.
I think the question really is, does it matter? If there were people from outer space, if there were, what would I do differently? So I think that's really been how I've wrestled with. Do I need to find out if there was, do I need to start looking at UFO literature? So, if somebody from an outer space landed and that, would I do anything differently? I'm doing whatever I can, the best I can, to try to help people cope with the challenges of protecting the species, protecting the planet, protecting other species. So I wouldn't do anything differently. I'm doing exactly what I want to be doing, what I think is the most important. So whether there are spirits out there or not, I don't know. I was just actually asked to write a blurb for a book. There's a group of people that got together to talk about experiences under the influence of DMT, where you have this experience of some alien intelligence. Is it really aliens? What is it? Of course they did not resolve it. But
it's still fascinating.
But I don't know. I think to be certain is a mistake. It's just a mystery, and I could easily believe that there's other intelligences.
And hopefully our senses get augmented to the point where we can explore past the 3D and figure it out. So cosmic siblings, let's find them. I care a lot about that. I care a lot about figuring out the history of the cosmos and where these Fermi filters happened. Okay, how about, do you think we're in a computer simulation?
Again, the same question is, does it matter? I mean, things matter. People seem to either experience pleasure or pain. I experience pleasure or pain. It feels real. So whether it's a computer simulation or not, who cares?
Beautiful. Awesome. And then maybe we do, what is the most beautiful thing in the world?
Well, I've heard this said that for men, the most beautiful thing in the world is a naked woman, and for women, it's a baby. Which reminds me of a poem of E.E. Cummings, one of my favorite E.E. Cummings poems, very short. Let's see. A pretty woman who naked is worth 1,000,000 statues.
Awesome. Rick Doblin, thank you so much.
Thank you, too.
This has been such a pleasure.
Because public education is absolutely crucial. I mean, we're doing the research, but we've got to get the word out.
Got to get the word out, and there's so many layers to what we unpacked today. Everybody, thank you so much for tuning in. If you guys found this content to be useful, definitely give it a share. Share it with other people around you. Let's get more word out about the importance of psychedelics and what they can do for humanity and what they have been doing for so long. And really get this in the hands of researchers and practitioners and healing humans.
And I'll just say that if you want more information, MAPS, M-A-P-S, maps.org.
In the bio as well.
And if you want to donate, we would be grateful.
Absolutely. And it's really important. Again, share. Links are going to be in the bio. Join us in the donation as well. Give the content a like, a comment below. Let us know your thoughts. Give us a subscribe. join the community, join us on Patreon. We need to continue supporting the sustainability of this project so we can bring all of the goodness across all these fields to you. And thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll catch you guys soon. Thank you, Rick.
Great. Ron, Ellen, thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay.
Awesome. Bye, guys.